Welcome to What the Bones Say. This is a podcast where we talk about all TTRPG kind of stuff. Currently today, we don't have our buddy Robert joining us, but we're going along with it. Either way, he'll be joining us in a different episode. But for now, it will be Sage Palillo, Cody Kerr, and myself, George Kalabokis. And we're going to talk about a bunch of TTRPG stuff. So Sage has a theme for today's episode. So I'm going to let him introduce it, and then we're going to get talking.
Yeah, so what we're going to start with talking about today, George, is inspirations into role-playing games and storytelling in general. The reason we're starting off with this is there is a very good reason for each one of us here who got into role-playing games, and I think it would be fun to explore how we got into it, and there are probably some really fun stories with that as well.
For sure.
I love stories.
So do I.
Everyone has them.
I lost mine.
Ugh.
Yeah, it was a bit tragic, actually.
Get back in the box.
All right, yeah, let's get back on topic.
All right, so inspirations. George, what inspires you, bud?
What inspires me?
Inspires you to not just be the best you can be, but to also play TTRPGs.
So should I say like what got me into TTRPGs, or should I say what inspires like my TTRPG stuff?
And any way you want to tell your story on how you got into it.
All right. Well, how I got into it is that I grew up watching some fantasy shows and movies. So Thundercats was this cartoon that aired for a little while that I enjoyed a lot growing up. And I loved The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and the Percy Jackson series growing up. And that all had these fantastical elements to it. Now, my mom had this red box Dungeons and Dragons set from the 80s, and she played D&D. Now, I got into TTRPGs because she gave me that box set. However, I didn't have anyone to play it with. So when I saw a flyer at school, I was in middle school for a D&D club, I was immediately drawn to the idea of Dungeons and Dragons. You create your own fantasy worlds, and you get to do all these cool stuff with it. That seemed to go along with my inspiration of all these fantastical things that I grew up with, and I just started putting two and two together.
Right on. You have a cool mom.
Yeah.
Yeah, my dad, when I first started getting to D&D when I was like 11, he got real mad because he thought the devil was going to get me. So, you know.
The satanic panic.
Yeah, that still has a grasp on some people. But
oh, yeah.
So, like, when you run games now, what are things that you go to that, really inspire the juices in your brain to flow?
Currently, when I go and run a game, depending on the setting, for D&D, I often look at Lovecraft, I look at Tolkien, I look at George R.R. Martin, and I look at those figures, and I tend to let that dictate the games that I run, and I like to add my own little flair to that. Sometimes I take biblical elements. I'm not a very religious person.
Mm-hmm.
However, there's a certain horror to the Bible that I find to be extremely interesting, and I try to take some of those elements and draw that into my fantasy games. I created a setting called Syndonia, and that Syndonia setting takes a lot of elements from Lovecraft and the Bible, and you'd be surprised by how well both of those go into tangent with each other.
I really love the idea of Lovecraft in the Bible.
Well, there's a really cool premise with the idea of Lovecraft, the horror of the unknown, and taking the Bible, which is really a description of man trying to describe the ideas of a higher being, yet you don't know what the higher being is, even though the Bible says a lot related to that. The idea of the unknown with the Bible being combined, and the stories the Bible tell, like the Great Flood and the locusts, the swarms, sin, the devil. There is so much that we have put names to that within the Bible you may not fully be like, okay, what is this? Is it real? Is it not? So just taking the Lovecraftian elements, putting it with the Bible, you create a cool setting. Like I played Syndonia. It's really fun to play in.
Yeah, I mean, like, what is it? The really old depictions of angels where they have like crazy eyes and their bodies barely look human. I don't know. That's like very Lovecraftian to me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's actually one of the main inspirations for my setting is those biblically accurate angels, because a lot of times when you go into like a cathedral or a church, you'll see these pleasant-looking depictions of angels, but if you go back to the Bible, they were these horrifying things, and with like eyes and rings and very strange beings that terrified man.
Mm-hmm.
And I just took that concept and I use that for the whole entire pantheon of the gods of my setting. So yeah, that's a big inspiration for that setting. But when I run more down to earth, grounded games, what tends to inspire me is the real world, kind of what's currently going on in our society politically.
Like this one?
Yeah, like this one.
This real one?
Yeah.
No, the other real one, Cody.
Shh, we don't tell them about it.
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot.
We don't talk about the other
Yeah,
real
we
one.
don't
Oh,
talk about it.
I'm sorry.
Continue.
Yeah. So, and that's actually another thing that inspired Syndonia too, besides, some of my more grounded games. But Vampire the Masquerade, which is a favorite game of mine that I'm sure we'll talk about later.
Can't wait.
That is literally every single horrible person in our world is a horrible person in that world. And any horrible thing that can be done in our world, it's a horrible thing that can be done in that world. And it takes place in the setting called the World of Darkness. And it very much lives up to its name. I tend to do when I run a Vampire the Masquerade game is that I look at what's currently happening, any protests that are going on, what's currently happening with maybe homeless veterans or so on. All these dark things in our world is currently happening in that world, and it's amplified. So when I run one of those games, I'm just inspired what's currently going on in our modern day society, and I let that dictate what's happening in game. So any horrible political figure that is in our world tends to be a blood-sucking vampire in Vampire the Masquerade.
Cool.
It's a pretty smooth translation, you'll find.
Yeah, for the most part.
Yeah.
It's just money they suck out instead of blood half the time.
Yeah, but
I'm not sorry.
he's not. But enough about my inspirations. Cody, what inspires you?
Oh wow. All right. I don't know. I've been into this kind of stuff since I was like a baby. So growing up, I had this guy named David. He was my gay mom. He was this guy that my Grammy met, and she used to be a barber, and she would cut his hair. And then she got invited to Oscar parties at him and his husband's house, and they were the shit. And he used to have Power Ranger little movies for me whenever they'd go over. And I don't know, I love David to pieces. I hope he's doing well out there. But I remember when I was like 6 years old, he brought me to the digital re-releases of the first Star Wars trilogy. And dude, when the door blows up on the blockade runner and Darth Vader marches through, I wanted to play pretend every day of my life since then. And then when I was 11, I moved from Florida to Massachusetts. And in Amesbury, where I lived, there was a hobby shop called the Toy Soldier. And I went in there, met a bunch of other kids that were into D&D and stuff, and got into 3.5. And now I'm going to be 32. So
Just like that.
yeah, that's just like that. The 21 years went by. It's like, where'd they go, dude?
A lot of dice rolling in these years. Right?
Yeah, yes. Too much, some might say, but I think enough.
There's never too many dice.
Never too many dice. My girlfriend hoards them. It's pretty attractive, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's an addiction. You start to like look for dice, the prices go up, and you're like, I'll just get one, and then suddenly you have this bag of dice.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, oh, you can just get a 10-pound bag of dice on Amazon for $100. Yes, please.
But yeah, Star Wars, that's a...
Yeah, Star Wars, my best games I have run to date. One of them was a Star Wars game. The other one was a World of Darkness game. So, we have things in common here.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that.
Thank you. That's good. What was I going to say? I had a thought. It's coming. It's coming. It's coming. It's coming. It's going to be there. It's going to be there. Okay. Things that inspire me when I run. I don't know. I really like to explore weird concepts and I don't know, philosophy in a lot of ways. Like I really like to explore I don't know what it means to be alive and what it means to be human. And one thing I like about D&D when it, like concepts like elves, it's these people that live forever. And in D&D 5th edition, like a few of the classes have ways where your character can live for like a 10,000 year period. Like druids, I think, get something like that.
Oh yeah, druids can live for an extremely long amount of time, especially when they get to a certain level. I think their lifespan's like quadrupled.
Same with monk.
It's insane. Yeah. Stuff like that is really interesting to me. That's why I like cyberpunk so much. Like altered carbon, the ability to just like, boop, oh, I'm in a new flesh body. Hooray. Bananas to me.
I loved altered carbon. I absolutely loved it. The premise, the story, the world, it was excellent. So you saying altered carbon, absolutely. 110% for sci-fi.
Yeah. Cyberpunk is one of my favorite genres. Like as we get later in this episode, we'll talk about some of our favorite games. And it's like more of an honorable mention, but Shadowrun was one of the first systems I ever encountered. Just being able to be just like a little cyber hacker infiltrator guy with my gizmos in my fingertips, man. Nothing's cooler than that, dude.
Yeah. No, Cyberpunk and Altered Carbon, their worlds are just very fascinating because it takes a lot of the modern problems and amplifies them in a way in how the future could look, especially Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk really captures the idea of a dark yet neon-filled streets of violence, corporate schemes, common people trying to survive with minimal needs.
Yeah,
it's a really interesting world to be set in, and I just love the idea of cyberpunk.
Especially that new Edge Runner. I can't speak. Especially that new Edge Runners show that came out not that long ago. That show was so good.
Yeah, it needs to get audio description, man. I really want to watch that show. I had like watched it with a couple people who have sort of described it to me, and it's oh god, it's fucking sick, dude.
The greatness of Edge Runner is a lot in the character dynamics, especially of the two main characters of, I'm blanking on the male name.
Lucy and David.
David, thank you. Lucy and David's whole arc together and their relationship and how natural it is and how it leads to conflict within the story is wonderful. It's a really good tragedy. And I think that kind of brings us back to the world of darkness. It's a type of hope punk.
Yeah.
Huh.
100%.
Interesting. Hope punk. That's never heard that concept before.
So hope punk is this genre of storytelling that essentially boils down to you just getting the little victories in life, that the odds are so stacked against you that these little victories are just enough hope to keep you going.
Wow, so that's just the genre of real life.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
Like we exist in a hope punk universe, man.
And I think there's another thing that hope punk really defines is that in order to create change, there is a lot of suffering. There's a lot of things that you have to sacrifice in order for that change to come about. Like Vampire, there's a lot that is about sacrificing and playing the game until you can create that change. And if you try to go all out, you create a lot of enemies. And hope punk, like those little moments in Edge Runner where the characters are just sitting down having a beer, or Lucy just cuddles up next to David. You're having those little victories. You're having those very definable moments in a human's life. And I think that's what hope punk really exemplifies.
And the best part is that it all came from a TTRPG.
Made in Poland, I think. No, the people that made the game are from Poland.
Yep. So close.
Almost Wilhelm screamed right there.
Am I doing it? I don't know.
No.
Okay.
We'll give you credit for trying.
All right, this part's being edited out.
Or you edit it out and then paste it at the end.
Us trying the Wilhelm scream.
Yeah,
Sure.
all right. Well, Sage, what about you, bud?
All right. So my inspirations really start when I was really young. My parents would read to me all the time, both my mom and my dad. I distinctly remember my mom even telling stories that weren't written. And one of the things she would do is when my brother and I were about to go to bed, she would sit down on the edge of the bed and she would be telling the story about Sage and Marcel the Brave and slaying all these dragons and working together. And that was when we were really young. And from there, the next thing that happened was my introduction to Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. And more so Lord of the Rings than Star Wars. Star Wars started my journey for the love of the hero's journey, for the love of the transition from a whiny brat into a wise and noble hero.
But Uncle Owen, we got to go to the Tashi station and pick up some power converters.
Yeah, and I love Luke. I love the character Luke Skywalker until the new movies came out.
We don't talk about the new movies.
Well, they
but
do exist.
Princess Leia flew, dude. Why can't anyone appreciate how Princess Leia flew?
I mean, are you okay?
No.
Well, like Star Wars did a lot. I love the premise of the Jedi Knight. I love the blasters, the sounds, the music. It was just like a kid's dream. But when Lord of the Rings came into my life, I was blown away. Now, my parents read to me The Hobbit all the time, and we had this big Hobbit book with all these watercolored paint illustrations. And I loved like the story, the orcs, the dwarves. It caught me in this fantasy world. And then the movies. That's when it hit. With these group of people trying to do the right thing to destroy the greatest evil in the world at the time of their age. And Frodo, not a warrior, not a great swordsman, a wizard, a king, basically just a simple person carrying the ring who has a golden heart. And his best friend Sam trying to help him along the way. And watching those movies, it captured my imagination, my brother's imagination, my sister's. And so, like, we would play in the backyard, striking imaginary orcs with our wooden swords, attempting to make these realities in our heads come to life. And then what happened was when I was 5, the power went out, and my dad pulled out a box set of the basic 3.5 rules, and I played as a human fighter with a sword and a bow, and we took on a black dragon. And since there, that was my introduction to Dungeons & Dragons. And then my first actual campaign was with my dad again. He was running the campaign for us, and I created Arceus Augustine, my first human paladin. Then middle school came around, George, and you were part of the Dungeons & Dragons club. And I tried to play as a player, and I did not like the DMs very much.
Yeah, that was my introduction too.
Yeah, having a bad DM to start can really ruin RPGs. And these DMs were more like bullies. So I got so mad that I decided to pick up a book and learn. Unfortunately, the edition I learned was 4th edition.
That's right.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, 4th edition. Now, 4th edition, in a way, brought my love of D&D. But when I picked up 5th edition, that was when I went, wow, the difference. And 5th edition really started to breach all these other genres for me. And then I watched Alien, I watched Dune, and then I read Dune. I started exploring Conan the Barbarian, Elric. So all these other elements started to influence me. And even today, like my mom and dad and I will sit down and talk about stories. My sister will participate. My brother will participate. So tabletop RPGs, stories in general have just been a part of like my family's culture.
Yeah.
And since your first human paladin, exactly how many human paladins have there been?
Almost exclusively just human paladin, right?
Pretty close. I think let's see. So Star Wars, I didn't play a human paladin.
Of course.
I tried to play like a human paladin. That failed miserably. I then played a bard goblin, and I've played 2 fighters. And the rest have been human paladins.
Well, I mean, he knows what he likes.
Hello, ladies and Jeb-Jebs. Welcome back to What the Bones Say.
Bones!
Yes,
What the bones?
bones. And we are going to be continuing our discussion with our favorite RPGs. And we're not talking about the explosive weapons. We're talking about tabletop RPGs, which, George, how about you get us started on what you think is one of your favorite tabletop RPGs?
Yeah, so for the longest time, I thought tabletop RPGs, in order for it to be good, it has to be fantastical in some sense. It has to be a sci-fi, like Star Wars or Blade Runner, or that it has to be some kind of fantastical epic where you go on adventures with little hobbits or halflings, whatever you want to call them.
Gnomes.
Gnomes, too. Gnomes are powerful, my man. And for the longest time, I kind of held myself to that standard. And for the longest time, I thought a tabletop RPG has to fit into that criteria. And then Sage's dad ran a game called Vampire the Masquerade, specifically V5 Vampire the Masquerade, the most recent edition of it. And initially, when he started getting Sage and our friend group into this game, I kind of came in with the philosophy of, all right, I'm going to make a character. I'm going to stick to something that I know and something that I typically like and do in some of my other games in terms of standard tropes, and I'll try to tie them to some comic books because I really love comic books, speaking of earlier inspirations when we were talking. And I wasn't really expecting too much of it in terms of my enjoyment. I knew Sage's dad would do a very phenomenal job at GMing and creating a wonderful story because I've seen him do such before, but I've never encountered a non-fantasy setting game like that. There is fantastical elements to it, but it's so grounded to reality. And I found myself to be pleasantly surprised in the depth of that game. We were talking earlier about Hope Punk, and that game definitely prescribes to that sort of ideology. And in terms of how Sage's dad, Dean, ran the game, it was very, very connected to it, maybe even more so than a standard Vampire the Masquerade game. And from there, I was hooked. And ever since, I've actually started running my own Chronicle of Vampire the Masquerade, and I try to tie in as many of those themes as I can. And I love the system in it. It has a humanity system where vampires start out with a certain level of humanity, and depending on the horrible deeds or the good deeds that you do throughout the game, you are eligible to gain or more frequently lose humanity. It's very tough to keep humanity in that game. In fact, I've never heard of anybody even gaining it, but I know that's a possibility in it. But it just explores so many facets of our modern day society and has this like very interesting commentary on our world and just through this World of Darkness lens. And ever since, I've just fallen in love and I've just played a ton of it. Cody, you mentioned that you ran a Vampire the Masquerade game and some World of Darkness games way back when. I don't know if you can.
Yeah, there is a World of Darkness is like grim surreality.
Yeah.
Especially when you get into stuff like Mage. It's been so long since I've looked at those books, but the way that Mage Awakenings could happen if you played a mage character, you'd go through these like almost like DMT lucid dream trips of uncovering your magic power. I don't know, always really fascinated me. Some of my favorite moments I've ever had in RPGs were in Vampire or World of Darkness games.
Yeah.
What are some of like the connections in the real world that you've managed to bring over into World of Darkness that are like your favorites?
So in terms of real world connections, I would probably say our current capitalist government of the U.S. is very tied into it.
Okay.
Arguably, the way that these clans and their systems of government are formed and the levels of control that happen. There's numerous levels of control that organizations within Vampire the Masquerade, sects as they're referred to, kind of modern or kind of reflect our real world in that regard. The Camarilla is this bougie, somewhere between, I wouldn't say democratic by any stretch of the mean. I would say this like strange dictatorship, and I wouldn't even go as far as that. This like strange parliament of vampires that decide what the rules are, what benefits them, and oftentimes the ones who are creating the rules and that are known as the elders, these vampires that have been around for so long. And a lot of these rules that they create, these 6 traditions that they talk about in the game, these 6 tenets, if you will, that keep all other vampires in their domain abiding by their rules alive and not hunted down by the Camarilla, are mostly built to benefit these elders. Not to get too deep into our real world, a lot of the policies that we currently have, I would argue, are a bit out of date in the current government of the U.S.
I would agree.
And in the regard that they are built on ideology that is no longer up to date. They are built to sustain people who currently are above a certain economic margin. So a lot of those issues just get reflected into Vampire the Masquerade. There's this one sect known as the Anarchs. Anarchism is a very real philosophy that exists in modern day society. The Anarchs of our world are a little different than the Anarchs of the World of Darkness, but there's still some overarching connections there.
Yeah, and I would also go as far as to say what Vampire really does is it explores the effects of hierarchy on the player characters.
That's right.
So you can have a player character who's an elder. You could work your around with your game master, sit down and say, I want to play an elder. And even though it gives you prestige, you come into the effect where there's this great ancient Greek story with the king sitting upon his throne, and one of his disciples comes over and is like, why are you glum? And the king basically makes a deal with him. He gets to be king for a day as long as he has a sword hanging over his head by a thin string. And his eyes, the disciples' eyes, are always glued to that sword. And that's what it does. Even if you're at that highest point, the idea of the untouchable point, you are still very vulnerable. And these player characters have to deal with that. And going off of what you're saying about the real world events, you can easily pinpoint a lot of the inspirations. The Anarchs are a great example because you can look at the history of anarchism and how the anarchs want to abolish the masquerade. They may not want to completely move in and integrate with human society. There's a lot of different philosophies with the anarchs. But how that game deals with morality as well is very, very interesting. It allows for characters to be very complex and allows that human element. And I think what Vampire does is allows for player characters to explore the monstrous side while trying to attempt and manage human elements of it.
And what's fascinating about it too is when you run this game for players, most players typically find themselves into being, by definition, not quote unquote good characters, not your stereotypical, sorry, Sage, paladin with a sword coming in to slay the dragon.
Well, listen, we need those paladins once in a while.
We do need those paladins once in a while, but in the world of darkness, it is a world of gray. Nothing completely makes sense, as does our world. There's a lot of things that we currently can't explain. There's a lot of things that can't be explained in that world. And the characters find themselves making tough moral decisions on, I'm a vampire. In order to exist, I need to drink blood from other people. So how do you go about drinking blood? Do you go up to a guy and beat the crap out of him and take his blood that way? Or do you go up to him and you ask him kindly, sir, can I please take your blood right now?
Blood, sir? Your blood, sir, please?
Or do you hunt your own kin?
Do you take blood from other vampires? There's so many facets and so many choices that you can make just based off of that. And that's only one small part of the game. It is a roleplay heavy game.
Yeah.
It is a roleplay game first and foremost. If you go into combat in that game, things can go south really quickly.
Been there.
Oh, yeah, me too. Everybody has played that game. They know. If you get into combat, it's big trouble. Unless your character is like really built for that, it's typically not a good idea.
Yeah.
And the medieval version of it, I got to read the older edition. I think it was the third edition.
Was it the Dark Ages?
Yes, it was the Dark Ages. Yeah. And you think the modern age is scary. If you got stabbed by a spear and it hit your heart, you went into torpor as a vampire. Arrows could put you into torpor. These people actually believed in the fairy tales, the folk tales that vampires were real. And that was actually always something I wanted to explore, like in the Baltic states. So it's a really well-developed, well-thought-out universe with a lot of roleplay opportunity.
And the meta plot for that game is insane. There's so many facets to it. There's tons and tons of books. It's like tackling an iceberg trying to understand Vampire the Masquerade. Even the world of darkness, just a whole entire thing, is insanely complicated and nuanced that I have not seen any other TTRPG homemade setting tackle.
And the philosophical aspect that I was talking about earlier, when things that inspire me tend to be of a more abstract nature, I think World of Darkness does that very well, especially with the idea of that humanity scale. Because I feel like in a lot of TTRPGs, like D&D is pretty notorious for this, for like the incentivizing murder hobo culture. And World of Darkness, like, it's all in your imagination and you can do whatever you want to do, but it does a great job of making you think about the consequences of your actions and like, wow, am I actually going to just be an evil person right now? And I really appreciate a game system that can make people think like that.
Yeah, and going off of my dad's game, he spent hours on each individual NPC. Everyone had a name, a backstory, an effect to the story. And going off of what you said, like when you decide to take out an NPC, that NPC had a story, That NPC had loved ones. That NPC had joy, hopes, dreams. And that is a very human reality that we face when those moments come upon us. You are facing the fact that taking of life is not glorious. It is gritty. It is horrendous. And as a vampire, sometimes you don't intend it. Sometimes the beast takes over, and suddenly your best friend, who you've known forever, is lying dead on the ground, and then you're left with a bunch of moral choices of what to do.
And that's the fascinating thing, too, about it, is there's this other sect. Currently in the most up-to-date version of the game is listed as an antagonist, but they weren't always that way. This sect known as the Sabbat are these vampires that decide to give into their beast, and they go into their monstrous nature. And that's another really fascinating avenue of character exploration that I've seen in that game. There's just so many. And your dad, Sage, did such a phenomenal job running, and it was Chicago by Night was the game that he was running, for anybody who's curious, that I was just drawn in to that game. And ever since, I've just been trying to find out as much knowledge as I can about it. And it led me to run a full chronicle that'll be ending soon.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could spend a whole podcast talking about the details of Vampire the Masquerade and the beauty of it. It's a game that, for me, I have trouble playing and running because it's so dark, but it's a game that no matter where you look, it's beautiful. It's a top tabletop RPG. I could not say it is not a good game. It's just more of a style choice. And I think later on we should definitely dedicate a whole podcast just to exploring Vampire the Masquerade.
I would completely agree. And you're absolutely right. It's not meant for everyone.
Thank you, George, for sharing. That was a really good conversation.
Yeah.
Vampire is an excellent game. We definitely recommend you check it out if you're into the darker side of humanity and the darker side of role-playing. And if Hope Punk sounds like your thing, go for it. So, Cody, we're going to move on to you, and I'm very curious to see what you're going to say is your favorite or a few favorite tabletop RPGs.
So I'm going to go with more a system that a bunch of games are based on, the Powered by Apocalypse system. Monster of the Week is a game that uses it. Dungeon World, the new Avatar, The Last Airbender RPG, which is a lot of fun, uses it. And what's kind of separates it from other TTRPGs is that where you think of D&D 5th edition, it's very mechanical. You are trying to fit everything that you want to do to these rules, and that's kind of how you play D&D 5th edition, and there's nothing wrong with that. I really like that system. But what Powered by Apocalypse does is it makes the rules fit to you, what you want to do. So there's a bunch of different moves that are available to players as they play the game. And it's kind of, as you're incentivized to describe what you're doing. You enter a room and you look around, and as you've described that, there's a couple moves that could fit that. There's read a bad situation, which would let you, it's kind of like a perception check. And then there's another one, investigate a mystery, which is kind of like your investigation check for people more familiar with those concepts. I don't know. I've always had so much fun with the system. You really come out with some very interesting and very vibrant stories using this kind of narrative system. It's all based on 2d6, which is very cool, instead of using a full range of dice.
What's your favorite story from it?
My favorite story from it? Using the Monster of the Week rules. I don't know if you guys have listened to the Adventure Zone podcast. Their second campaign used the Monster of the Week system. Very interesting campaign, very cool characters, very cool ways of going about things. As a DM in Monster of the Week, it's very fun to make adventures because you don't just make campaigns like you typically think. Monster of the Week is a game based off of shows like Supernatural and Buffy the Vampire Slayer and I don't know, Doctor Who could fit into this realm. Just like kind of weekly episodic shows where there's like a different mystery or critter or bad guy of some variety to undo or solve or defeat. And the way that you write these up as a DM is in these things called mysteries. And it's very fun the way they lay it out in the books. It's like you come up with a concept, a hook, and then they give you this little countdown thing where it's very... it's like very lore-y, the way that they list it out. It's like 6 steps, and it's day, and then dusk, and then shadows, and then night, and then midnight. I'm messing those up a little bit. But for each of those steps, for whatever mystery you're designing, you kind of further along what the bad guy is doing. For instance, I worked on a mystery called The Devil Dog of 7th Street. And, at the first step, there's a guy gets chased. And as the story progresses, if the players don't stop the bad thing, eventually the game will get to step 2, where the neighbor's cat was unfortunately mutilated because of some devilish activity. And it would kind of continue like that until the players either solve the mystery or don't. And for those listening who are interested, eventually we're going to be doing some one-shots, and maybe Monster of the Week will be featured.
Yeah, we are planning on doing a bunch of one-shots exploring different RPG systems, including Monster of the Week. We have Vampire the Masquerade. We're going to have some 5e for D&D. We're going to do some Forbidden Lands. If we can, I want to look into doing Alien, Star Wars, seeing what the rights behind those are, but that would be a lot of fun if we're able to do those.
Oh, yeah.
Heck yeah. One other really fun thing, too, about Monster of the Week, as you do character creation, and it's like this for all the Powered by Apocalypse games, there is a section where in the beginning of the game, you get to write up bonds that you have with the other characters. In Monster of the Week, it could be, say, Sage, say you're a monster hunter.
Oh, yeah.
And George, say maybe you're a vampire of your peers, if you would.
Oh.
So, Sage, your character could have a bond with George's character that's like, they're a monster, but because they've done something good, you're willing to look the other way. And it creates a lot of really interesting narrative opportunities. And if you actually engage in role play based around these bonds, you get experience.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, I like that.
Where is my water?
Here's your water, bud. Right here.
Thank you.
Of course, man. No, I think Monster of the Week is going to be a lot of fun to try out.
I definitely like role-playing games that explore those ideas where you see 2 people getting along that don't normally would get along, and those always make out for the best games and the best parties, having such a oddball group of adventurers or whoever that are just like really weird together, and you wouldn't normally think of that, and then that creates a scenario in roleplay where you have to kind of justify that to a certain extent, or you don't justify it, and it's interesting through that way. But
yeah, I think it's a game too. I could see it going awry if you everyone's had those new players that are really just anti-party for whatever reason. Yeah. I could see it becoming a real hassle around the table in situations like that. But if you get like a really good party of people working together, some of the best stories are going to come out of that, hands down.
That's the thing about tabletop RPGs, isn't it? That most of them are based off of this party format. I mean, sure, there's solo play games, but a lot of games are based off of party systems. And sometimes some people can't get along with that, unfortunately, which creates some difficult circumstances. But it's a collaborative game. Nobody's the main character. There's always some kind of problem that needs to be solved through either collaborative teamwork or some other means.
Yeah.
Rarely is it ever a solo task, and approaching it in that regard, I think, from my personal opinion, is a mistake.
And it's one of the quickest lessons you learn as a game master / dungeon master is the narrative structure. How you build a narrative structure should not be the way you write a book or a movie. Those are predetermined. You have control of every aspect. And as soon as you recognize that fact and open it up to the possibility of the unknown, the chaos element that your characters bring to the table, that is where the beauty shines, is where the flower blooms, because your characters and you are influencing the story. In many ways, you are the challenges and your characters are the solutions. Let them be the solutions. Let them thrive. And when they fail, don't punish them. Let them look for another way to succeed.
Yeah, because you're telling a story. You're not trying to win or lose. And George, what you had talked about, is very interesting too, because it comes to the heart of one of my favorite things about these kinds of games, where it's like a microcosm of real life. Like you said, you're a group of people solving a problem, and that's like all real life is community trying to find a way to make the world a little bit better. And I think in these games, you can learn group dynamics and like you can learn how to work as a team and in a group in some of the most extraordinary ways.
Oh, yeah. Well, not to go too far down this rabbit hole, but as human beings, we strive to have connections, whether you're an introvert or not. I'm extremely introverted, but we strive to have tangible connections to others around us, because without that, we would just go insane, to be quite frank. And, tabletop RPGs is no different, is that they're always best played together.
Yeah, and one of the things that a lot of historians and people studying the past look at is the fact that humans developed community. That is a sign of human cultural evolution. And that is very prominent in our species. A lot of us want connection. And yes, we may be introverted, but we usually have one or two connections we reach out to. We like being social, and not having that social connection can have harmful effects.
Well, I think, this is getting further down the rabbit hole. I guess the last thing I'll say in this train of thought, it's interesting that introspective or introverted and extroverted are, they're often your mode of interaction, and they're like what recharges you. Introverted people often are recharged by being alone and reading a book or meditating, and extroverted people are often charged or recharged by group activities and being loud and boisterous. It's how I get through my day. But I think just because we are one or the other doesn't mean we don't also thrive in the other atmosphere at times.
Exactly. And we're social creatures by nature. Sage said it best himself. Without that, what are we? That's just what we've been built to be throughout evolution of our whole entire, life.
Yeah.
Just lumps of beef.
Just lumps of farty beef, dude.
Yeah, we're just sacks of meat piloted by strange brains.
Or 2% beef.
Meat gas.
Yeah.
This has gotten very weird.
This is Sage.
Yes.
It's your turn to tell us about your favorite RPG. Rob, really? Man, he was our rock. I feel like with Rob here, we stayed on track.
Yeah, we're still on track. We're just taking levities.
We're on the Thomas the Tank Engine track.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can he do it? We don't know. All right, Sage, what's your favorite TTRPG?
So I'm tied between 3. Because if you asked me probably 4 years ago, I would have said Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition until I was introduced into these 3 games. So the first game I'll briefly mention that is almost up there with the other 2 is Aliens by Free League. Aliens is excellent. It takes the premise of horror and puts it into a game because there are elements your characters can't control. And those elements are decided by something called stress dice. And stress allows you to gain adrenaline, or it makes you panic. So Alien is one of my favorite sci-fi universes. I love the design of the creature. I love the story. I love the analog sci-fi feel. It's just a really good universe. And then putting characters through that type of hell is amazing. It's a great way to see how they work together or how they fall apart. And all the groups I've seen succeed in Alien have worked together. I've had a whole Alien group survive a cave with aliens dropping down from stalactites and crawling through these narrow holes to try and drag these characters, and every single one of them made it out alive. And then I've had those who have turned on each other and get ripped apart, mostly by each other, and then the aliens finish them off. And the game is really designed to create that sense of dread. And the tension that is involved is wonderful. It's a great game to check out. It's more designed for cinematic play, but there's a lot of opportunity to have those long drawn out stories with badass characters. But it brings me to the other game by Free League I want to mention, which is Forbidden Lands. Forbidden Lands brought a new type of game to the table for me. It brought this gritty world where everything is explorable. It becomes a sandbox. You can explore every hex, and every hex has some sort of adventure. It made exploration fun. It made magic dangerous but powerful. It made your sword very worthy, but against a spear and an opponent using a spear, they could outmaneuver you and get that finishing blow. Your characters became very manipulative, not manipulative, moldable. That's the word I'm looking for, moldable. You could mold a bard into a badass two-wielding warrior. You could mold a warrior to actually be more of a pacifist and only use his sword when he has to. The idea of the character creation was to keep it so that you only had a maximum of 6 strength, which is 6 hit points. So the whole game is relatively low with the math, and how armor works is it absorbs damage rather than take it, but the gameplay just makes it a lot of fun. And when those moments where the monster hits you and your armor saves your life, you're like, oh, it's so nice that I had the heavy armor. And then there's times where you're like, why do I have the heavy armor? I'm now stuck in this battle and I can't move. It just adds that realism to combat that sometimes I feel is missing in other games. But the downside is it does make it a little grindier, because especially bigger battles, sometimes those took a few hours. But if you have characters that know what you're doing, it will go quickly. But the world building of that is excellent. We're talking about a land covered in a blood mist, and suddenly this mist dissipates and all these ruins open up and people are starting to adventure, and it has a very good sword and sorcery with an epic fantasy vibe.
What my favorite thing is about that system is that there's a bunch of dwarves that worship a guy called Huge.
Yes, that is great. And they're like, Huge will build the world, so we are these beings that will help build Huge and make Huge huger. And it's a really funny concept.
I just really find it funny that there's a god named Huge.
Yeah. Why did Huge make them so little?
Because he wanted to be bigger than them.
He's got a real sense of humor, this Huge guy.
Yes, he is. I would like to think he's actually smaller than the dwarves and messed up and just named himself Huge.
Well, honestly, I think my new headcanon for Huge is he's actually just a sentient little pebble at the core of the earth.
He's literally a living oxymoron.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's huge.
Oh, it's huge.
That's cool. Forbidden Lands does do exploration and survival very well. The hex map and being able to crawl around on your adventures and finding all these different locations is really fun.
Yeah.
I look forward to playing another game of that one day.
Yeah.
It has. Sorry. It has a hint of West March to it. If anybody's familiar with that, it has a bit of. It's like if you were to dabble salt on a piece of fine meat. I don't know why I'm going down this rabbit hole. Beef. A piece of beef, whatever. Beef. But it has this nice flair to it that other systems don't have. It doubles down on things that you can kind of sort of see in other systems, and it fully fleshes it out.
Yeah, and I like the combat system. It's a dice pool system based around D6s. And if you figure out how you want to build your character, you can make really fun characters. I just finished a campaign where I basically made my character to be a knight. And this knight had 15 dice every time he rolled to hit. You only need one success. You only need 1 6 to hit. And I was rolling like 5 to 6 on average. And it was just a lot of fun. And the different styles of play that Forbidden Lands allowed made it great. But there was one game that I actually think is my favorite game over Forbidden Lands, and that is Old School Essentials by Necrotic Gnome, which is basically the original Dungeons and Dragons.
I love that game.
I've yet to play it. I look forward to trying that out at some point.
It's a lot of fun.
It's excellent. It is what I think Forbidden Lands lacked in the quickness of it, but also captured all the things I love about the Forbidden Lands. And I will continue to play that game, but Old School Essentials brought that light. It brought that light I was missing in Dungeons and Dragons. The thing I found about 5e that really turned me away was the magic. I thought everything was too magical. I thought my fighter should not be casting spells. Like, there were classes I found that had way too much magic, and this magic spells broke the game. Trying to run a game where walls don't mean anything in a dungeon crawl becomes very problematic.
Honestly, I think Dungeons and Dragons, like them throwing magic at the fighter, it's just literally them being like, well, everyone says the wizards are better at high level, so give the fighter magic.
And I think that's what drove me away from 5e, but then Old School comes around by Necrotic Gnome, and I'm reading it, and I'm starting to see the beauty of it. It's deadly. It is very deadly. There are no death saves in the base game. You drop to 0 hit points, you are dead. And that encourages your players to do other things. And how it stops the murder hobo epidemic is by not giving you the most XP through kills, but rather through treasure. So you essentially becomes these treasure hunters. And the stories allowed for more of a weird fantasy where you could have some sci-fi elements coming into your fantasy world. And originally, fantasy and sci-fi were kind of one genre, and then they got split. But what Old School just does is, for example, the fighter simply gets a stronghold at level 1 as its first ability and is able to use all weapons, all armors, and has the highest hit dice for hit points. That's a D8. So the hit points are really regulated, so you're not having a character with 200 hit points that halves all damage, such as the Barbarian Path of Bear. It's just too much math. And everything is kind of like move at once. You have a declaration of movement, and then you have the attacks. The attacks are based on what type of weapon or spell you're using. For example, range goes first, then magic, then light weapons, then heavy slow weapons. And that's how initiative works. And if your party won initiative, they get to attack first. If the enemy won initiative, they get to attack. And it's very simplistic, but magic is so powerful, but it takes a while to earn it. And the classes, like the Paladin, I love it in Old School.
Surprise, surprise.
Surprise, surprise.
He knows what he likes.
Yes, I do. But I also thought about playing other classes because of how Old School designed them. I liked the Barbarian.
Is there a gasp thing on that soundboard? Just like,
I know. It's going to become a joke.
I'll add one in. Wait, stop. There it is.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I heard it.
Yeah, well, Barbarian was very much more towards the Conan element, which I really like. Conan the Barbarian. I love the stories. I love the fighter in this. Even though it's very simplistic, I think it allows for the more martial. And for wizards, I actually thought about playing a magic user.
That's
I did.
Big news to anybody listening. Sage wanting to play a magic user is like...
I did.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's a big wow.
Moment of silence for, just the standards gone by.
So when do you think that we'll see you play an Echo Knight?
No, fuck that. No.
What?
No.
But Shadow Friend.
No. It's broken.
Shadow French
It's broken.
punch and
No.
enemies.
It's just broken. Stop. No. Get help.
I have tried,
Oh.
and no one came.
Well,
Jesus.
probably because your Echo Knight slayed them all.
That's true. The Shadow, he's so untamable. Any honorable mentions?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I have one. I'm a big fan of a lot of. I haven't gotten to play a lot of them, but I have enjoyed looking into a number of different like one-page RPGs. Really simple to pick up and play stuff. And the one that I'll throw down is Lasers and Feelings. Lasers and Feelings is a sci-fi based one-page RPG where it's all about a D6. You pick a target number between 2 and 5, and that's your like laser feelings number. And now as you play, and all your actions will either fall under lasers or feelings. So if you attack someone rashly, that might be more feelings. If you shoot someone with a ray gun, that might be more lasers. If you are in a high-speed chase and you're doing some crazy maneuvers, maybe that's feelings. But if you're calmly calculating the destruction of a planet using a giant death ray and or laser.
Using Rey from Star Wars?
Using Rey from Star Wars, if you're just going to shoot her out of a cannon, that might be more lasers.
Well, I mean, Leia can fly through space. Why can't Rey?
Don't encourage them.
This isn't a rabbit hole we want to go down.
Yeah, Rey's going to be in the new
sure we got
Star Wars
time?
movie, and I hate it. Edit this out.
I will, or else Disney will come after us.
Yeah.
Well, we never said Disney. We just said Rey. It could be a different
Well, I just
Rey.
said Disney.
Well,
See, I said it again.
you said it again.
I said it again.
said it.
I meant everyone loves Raymond Ray.
Who's that?
I like that show.
Ray Romano.
Hey,
I don't know.
hey, Raymond.
But yeah, laser feelings, lasers and feelings, whatever the name of it is. Very excellent little one-page RPG.
I think for me, I would have to go with Dead Men Walking, which is kind of a offshoot of Old School, and then I would actually go with the Warhammer game. Warhammer 4th Edition was actually a lot of fun to run. It is a percentile dice-based game, and if you think Old School is gritty, Warhammer 4th Edition takes it up a little bit. I mean, we're talking about opening session. Our friend Ethan is just kind of doing his thing. A gunfight breaks out with someone just shooting into the crowd, and the musket ball hits him in the leg and hits his artery, and he starts bleeding out. Not even 10 minutes into the game, just because of the percentile. And like, if you lose an arm, it's permanent. There's no way to get it back. You lose a leg, you need a peg leg. It's a really gritty universe. And I think it's a lot of fun. I think we had a blast, though George figured out my mystery really quick.
I'm very good at figuring out mysteries.
Yeah, it was sad
Wow.
for me.
Wow, George. Way to just like pop his little balloon, you know?
You know, well, at least I figured it out lawfully. I didn't cheat to figure it out. It was my own brain power that did.
Oh, big brain.
Not really.
Oh, excuse you.
Well, I mean, yeah, it was a big plot twist, you know.
Wow, the salt, dude.
Look, me trying to downplay myself, I accidentally just downplayed Sage. I didn't mean to do that. It was a very interesting
Accidentally.
twist.
That was
a very
a
interesting
beautiful
twist.
way to blow up both of you.
My pride is hurt.
I'm crying now.
You need to.
For once, I'm not crying. Yay!
What?
Usually, I cry.
I'm sorry, man.
It's okay. It's I'm an easy. I have watery eyes when I laugh hard.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's not. I'm not saying I'm not just like sad all the
Do you
time.
eat a lot of onions?
No.
Oh.
No, I dislike onions. But you know what I don't dislike? Whatever George's honorary mention.
Oh, God. What do I mention? Sage kind of mentioned my main thing, which is Old School Essentials, and I've been getting into that lately myself. I suppose just to mention something for the sake of mentioning something, There's a new Blade Runner game that's come out that is very, very interesting. It deals with whether or not you're a replicant or a human. And those of you who know Blade Runner know that replicants are these robots that have grown to this point where they are indistinguishable from humans. And these Blade Runners go and hunt down these robots that have developed humanity, going into that whole rabbit hole again. But just to have a game that explores like that idea, it's very sci-fi, and I love that. And I love the movies. I'm a big fan of Harrison Ford, and no matter what Harrison Ford does, Indiana Jones, Blade Runner, and Star Wars are three of my favorite things, and that man's in all of them. So if Harrison Ford's connected to something, it's guaranteed to be usually rather good. So
it's so hard for me not to just break out in the Indiana Jones theme song.
Yes.
It's one of the best pieces of music ever made.
Oh, yeah.
Boom, 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 boom.
And I don't know when this podcast episode is getting released, but there will be an Indiana Jones movie soon, and I am cautiously excited for it.
Yes.
Costumistic.
Yeah. Costumistic, whatever word that is that we just created. I don't know why I'm taking credit for that because you're the one who said it, but yes, that word.
He's
Doesn't he
big
like to
brained,
do
my
that?
big brain.
Doesn't
brain,
he
big
like to
brain.
do that, Cody? Like, just takes your credit. You know, he just insults your ideas and
Well, I mean, when you look like Javier Bordeaux, I don't know if you're going to impale me in the head with that weird hydraulic air gun thing, so I'm going to just let him take it. Like,
Well, what about this? I offered you friendship and you spat in my face.
eh.
I got nothing.
Okay.
Like, I mean, I appreciate your gusto.
Thank you.
You know, I would never spit in your face, though. Only if, I guess, if you asked. No.
What if Willem Dafoe asks?
Well, I mean, how could you say no to Willem Dafoe?
And that beautiful face of his.
How do you Dafoe the foe?
Yeah, honestly, like, I've been blind for 10 years, but I can't get that man's face out of my head.
Is that all you see?
Yeah.
That
Yeah, Willem Dafoe's face and, like, two of Josh Hartness's abs.
just two.
Just like, I saw that movie, what's that, 40 Days and 40 Nights? That, like, movie that was on Comedy Central every day forever and probably still is. And it's just, there was, like, one scene in there where he was just in a blanket, and, like, all I can remember is, like, the two bottom right abs of his, like, torso. They were good abs.
What about Josh Groban?
Oh, fudge. Who's he? Who's Josh Groban?
Don't worry about it.
Okay. You know
We're
what?
cutting this part out anyways, so
No, we're not. It's going at the end.
I love Josh Gad. Olaf dies.
I haven't seen Frozen. How could you spoil that for me?
Spoilies.
How could you spoil a decade-old movie? That's a decade old. Can you believe
Oh
that?
my God, is it really?
Yeah.
That's a lot.
No.
Would you like to play a tabletop? It's not just a tabletop.
That's how we outro it. That's how we outro it. Would you like to play a tabletop? We can roll some dice.
No, that's too cringy. That's beneath us.
Is it?
No, but I don't want to do that.
Roll the bones. Roll the bones.
I need to roll really good right now.
Oh no, it's another nat one.
Wait, Cody. That's what we're gonna do. It's just like a drunken, like roll the bones cover. All right. Well, thank you very much for listening to us tonight, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed us rambling on about some tabletop RPGs.
Yes.
And this is what the bones have said. So we hope you join us next time. We will be continuing with various different explorations of tabletop, as well as seeing what other shenanigans we will get into. So I bid you all a good night.
Listen to the bones rattling.
You have a